that took place in the Diocese of Grand Rapids. Since taking office in 2019, I've pledged to use the resources of my department to ensure that cases of sexual abuse and assault are thoroughly reviewed, and that whenever we are able to do so, we pursue criminal charges, and we do so relentlessly and aggressively. Our additional promise to the many victims throughout the clergy abuse investigation was to make the results of the investigation transparent at its completion. And to that end, this is the 5th of 7 reports that we're releasing. We will release a report for each of the 7 dioceses of the Catholic Church here in Michigan. Now, previously, we released our report on the Marquette Diocese in October of 2022, Gaylord in January of 2024, Kalamazoo in May of 2024, and Lansing in December of 2024. These reports are important, not just because we made a promise to the survivors of these abuses years ago, but because victims, especially in cases like these where the assaults were perpetrated by entrusted members of a community, are often silenced, in some cases for decades or even a lifetime. By publishing these reports, we are sharing their stories and validating their experiences. Criminal prosecutions are just one accountability metric. By ensuring each victim is heard, regardless of how long ago their assault may have been, is important in acknowledging their pain and fostering a culture that prioritizes these victims over their silence. The Grand Rapids Diocese report is a compilation of the information obtained from my department tip line, victim interviews, police investigations, open source media, paper documents seized from the diocese, and electronic documents found on the diocesan computers, as well as reports of allegations disclosed by the diocese itself. The Diocese of Grand Rapids agreed to provide reports of abuse directly to the Department of Attorney General. Victims often reach out to their faith leaders to share stories of abuse, and the willingness and cooperation from the Diocese of Grand Rapids to provide this information was instrumental in the compilation of this report. Of the 1,228 tips we've received, 105 were related to the Diocese of Grand Rapids, with 27 coming from the diocese itself. Of the 220 boxes of paper documents, 60 pertain to the Diocese of Grand Rapids, and over 270,000 of the 3.5 million electronic documents we received were also related to the Diocese of Grand Rapids. The list of allegations of sexual misconduct by priests, either against children or adults, contained within the report dates back to January 1st, 1950, and is derived from information gleaned from a search warrant that was executed against the diocese on October 3rd of 2018. The report contained detailed descriptions of allegations of sexual abuse and other sexual crimes against minors and adults. Now, I must note that a criminal charge is merely an allegation, and a defendant is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. The Grand Rapids report identifies 51 priests, of which 38 were ordained or incarnated by the Diocese of Grand Rapids. For the 51 priests identified, 37 are known or presumed to be dead. Of the 14 still living or presumed to be still living, none are active in ministry in the Diocese of Grand Rapids. This report represents countless hours of work and dedication since the department first executed search warrants as part of the clergy abuse investigation. And I want to especially commend the Michigan State Police and my dedicated staff on their unwavering commitment to seeing justice served in these tremendously difficult cases. I especially want to thank the survivors of abuse who have willingly shared their stories, sometimes after decades of silent suffering. Their willingness to come forward helped bring attention to an issue that has affected so many in our state and our country, including children. As part of my clergy abuse investigation to date, my department has issued criminal charges in 11 cases and secured convictions in 9, resulting in justice for at least 38 survivors, completed the paper document review of the diocese, reviewing more than 1.5 million documents, completed the electronic document review of more than 3.5 million documents, hired and trained a full-time victim advocate to support the hundreds of victims identified during the course of this investigation, and continued to refer the completed criminal investigations back to the respective dioceses, and followed up with victims who have not been interviewed by law enforcement with a trauma-informed, victim-centered interviewer. If you have information about abuse in the Catholic Church, please contact my department's hotline at 844-324-3374. Victims of sexual abuse or assault in need of additional resources may also contact 855 Voices 4, VOICES 4. We must break down the walls of silence that so often surround sexual assault and abuse. And in the end, we truly hope that this report provides a voice to those who have suffered in silence for so long and shines a light on those alleged offenders whose actions allowed them to evade true accountability. And with that, we're happy to take questions.
Again, I ask that you please use the raise your hand function. If you're unable to use that, feel free to drop a question in the chat if you have one as well. Seeing no hands up, oh, there we go. Lisa Roos Church with MERS. Oh, Lisa, did you have a question or?
Yes, ma'am. I was turning it off since you called my name.
You were prompt.
This is Lisa with MERS. You have 2 other reports expected to come. I assume you hope to get those done before you leave office. So do you have an ETA on those?
Yes, I think, Danielle, we have one report coming this spring and then one in December. Do you want to clarify that at all?
Yes. So we hope to have Saginaw out by the spring, so spring 2026. And then the Detroit report will be out by the end of the AG's term, so December of 2026.
Thanks.
Ken Kolker from Wood TV.
Hi, Ken.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good morning. I'm wondering, are there any cases in which the diocese was aware of allegations of child sexual abuse, did not report those, and if they had back in the day, that you would have been able to, someone would have been able to prosecute that, but now the statute of limitations has run out? Or did you find anything like that?
Danielle?
I'll have to refer you back to the report. There's nothing that's immediately jumping out at me that I can recall, but I think you'll see that the report is 300 and some odd pages and involves 51 separate entries. And so I have to let the report speak for itself.
We also identified 14 priests involving sexual abuse, involving children in the Grand Rapids Diocese, with 33 victims or survivors. Could you talk about, is that number close as far as the child sexual abuse? Also, how many survivors have you identified and have you interviewed?
I think the report should indicate all of those things. I know that this just went out this morning, so you probably haven't had time to sit with it, but it's pretty specific in terms of how many individuals, both as victims and also as alleged perpetrators, are right in the report. Have you had an opportunity to look at it yet, Ken?
I've started. It is long, as you said. And can you talk more about why no criminal charges in the Grand Rapids Diocese?
Yeah, well, simply because for any cases in which you had a complainant that was willing to come forward and testify, either you had the priest had already died and was deceased, or you had the statute of limitations had run. So it was a combination of those things for any of the cases that would otherwise have been able to move forward. Obviously you can't prosecute a person who's no longer living. And we had statute of limitations issues to deal with.
Can you talk about was there a single most egregious case that you saw in the Grand Rapids Diocese, something that stood out?
What do you think, Danielle?
So I want to go back to the last question first, about why we were not able to move forward. We did have cases that were within statute of limitations where we had victims who were not interested in a criminal prosecution. As I'm sure you all are aware, that it is incredibly challenging to move forward in court without a victim. In addition, we had one case, Father Amogo, who I think has already been reported on at least a little bit, that we did not move forward. And that is because we did not believe that we could prove the elements of a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. I would like to just speak to that entry, if I can, for just a moment. I want to clear up two things. One, in that section of the report, I believe that there are 6 victims that are identified. We had one that was within statute of limitations that had a victim that wanted to be able to move forward, and that was the case that we were not able to do so. I want to clarify that the defendant did in fact, or the suspect did in fact take a polygraph, a private one, but that was not part of our equation. Polygraphs are not a good tool or a good resource for the issue of consent. And that really was the case as it related to this particular entry. And so it was discounted. Now, polygraphs, of course, are a law enforcement tool that we do use, but I do want to make it clear that that did not have any basis on our ability to move forward in his specific instance. So that sort of talks about why we were not able to move forward. And then, quite frankly, kind of forgot your last question. Oh, about the most egregious. I think it is not within my purview and that of the AG to categorize or put into order some of the worst offenders. I think that they all are terrible. And when you're talking about priests being an offender, whether it's an adult who is vulnerable and seeking counseling, or simply spiritual guidance from their leader, that is terrible any which way it happens. And so while there may be differences in how we can charge people criminally that recognize more egregious charges over others, this report is full of instances that, quite frankly, are life-changing and earth-shattering for these victims. And so I can't say that any one over the other is worse than the last one.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ken, we have a couple other people with their hands up, so I'm going to let some other people get some questions in, and we can circle back to you. Just drop in the chat if you have more, okay? Ashley Talley.
Ashley, you're on mute.
Ashley, you're still muted, yeah. Oh, nope. If you want to drop your question in the chat, I can read it off. I'll go to Beth LeBlanc next, and then Ashley, I can read your question out of the chat for you after that.
Okay, just checking. How about
Oh, wait, nope, there you are. You're back.
Okay. Apologies. Gosh, you'd think for all these years we'd be good at Zoom. Following in Father Amogo's case, the statute of limitations doesn't, it's not for first degree sexual assault. Is that right? It's only for lesser degrees?
Yes, that's right. Yep. So,
Okay.
but again, sexual assault in the first degree no longer has a statute of limitations, but that changed in 2001. So for many of the cases that happened prior to 1995, those cases all are outside the statute unless there is something that we can show that the offender moved out of the state of Michigan, sort of putting a pin in that statute, and it does what's called tolling. And so in some cases, we have been able to charge cases that predate 1995, but in Amogo's case, that is the situation.
Okay, understood. We've been going through the report here this morning since you sent it out about an hour ago, and I was reading several accounts of where the Grand Rapids Diocese knew about prior sexual abuse allegations and still hired the people, and at least in one case did payouts on victims that sued civilly. Is that something that you looked at closely, that the payouts that they had done previously? And in one instance, Father Sullivan, it said that the New Hampshire AG's office gave you documents that the diocese here didn't give you, written things back from the 50s that showed that they knew about it. And so I just wondered about the level of cooperation that you guys felt from the diocese and how the previous lawsuit settling had been part of your investigation.
So the documents sort of speak for themselves in terms of the entries. I do think that the diocese, the current staff at the Diocese of Grand Rapids has been an instrumental partner in this work. In fact, the last Imogo entry, or the last Imogo victim that we were made aware of, came to us through the diocese. And so they have been forthcoming in reports, to us since I've been in the seat, February of 2019. The report itself sort of speaks to the level of knowledge by the diocese and their behavior. I think, at least from my perspective, things changed in 2002 with the Dallas Charter, which said all reports of sexual abuse have to be reported to law enforcement, and that is consistent with what we have seen. Things that happened before 2002, certainly it was a different story. And we've tried to be as clear as we can with what we know.
Thank you.
Beth LeBlanc, please.
Hey, Attorney General, thank you for taking these questions. I know really since the Nassar case, there have been various pieces of legislation that have come up in Lansing to expand the statute of limitations for civil or criminal, to open up windows, like look back periods to go after those cases that would otherwise be screened out. Can you speak to like what extent that might have been helpful, or if it was really immaterial to your investigation and your ability to either bring charges or to bring like a civil suit in some of these cases?
Well, let me start off by saying that we don't bring those types of civil suits. That's not something within the authority of our department. Those would be brought by individual survivors of sexual abuse. And candidly, I've sort of lost track of, there have been several efforts to have legislation enacted. And I don't remember whatever the latest proposal is that's out there right now. And so I can't speak to that. In terms of changes to the criminal statute of limitations, as Danielle has indicated, we've already had a change as to CSC 1, and now there is no statute of limitations at this point. But obviously retroactivity is different. And, typically for a crime, it is unusual, in fact, unheard of for a crime that was told otherwise, for then the statute of limitations to change and then to make that retroactive. The, criminal jurisprudence frowns upon that. So that generally doesn't happen. Danielle, I see you're coming off. Do you want to address that?
Yeah, I would just say that once the statute of limitations has expired, there is no ability for us to go back and pick them up and be able to criminally charge them. So for example, if we had a case that occurred before 1995, such as 1991, 92, but the statute ran because at that time it was only 6 years, and now the statute of limitations has been eliminated for CSC 1, we don't get the ability to go back and pick it up because once it's gone, it's gone. I think my understanding is that the current legislation is that it would extend or eliminate the statute of limitations for both CSC 3 and CSC 4. I could be wrong about that. Then the civil statute of limitations, I think, extends it out considerably, I think to the age of 56, since that is the age at which most victims either disclose their abuse or come to terms with it, really giving them then the opportunity for a lifetime to be able to sue. And then, of course, the look back window, again, is a civil remedy that would allow victims of past sexual abuse to be able to sue their offender in civil court. But none of those had any consideration as it relates to our decision to move forward with charges. Since the statute, once it's been extinguished, we can't go back.
Lisa again.
Yes, thank you. Some will argue that the criminal charges help bring justice, as some may define it. Can you share what, if anything, the victims have shared with you about the importance of releasing these reports and how it may have helped with their healing, especially in those instances where you haven't been able to bring criminal charges?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Lisa. And I think it's an important one to understand that criminal prosecution is only one way in which victims are, helped to heal after suffering the trauma of sexual abuse. And I think that a lot of people sort of minimize what the impact is of a person who has been sexually abused in a way that it completely, oftentimes, just destroys a person for the rest of their life. So with criminal prosecution, obviously, when we can do that, we make that effort. But there's a lot of victims that they don't want to go into a court of law. They don't want to be subjected to cross-examination by a criminal defense attorney. They don't want to tell their story to a jury over the course of many days or sometimes weeks. And that's not the thing that helps them heal. Sometimes what helps them is having therapy, which, again, that's a big part of what we do, is try to connect people so that they're able to get, treatment when they're interested in that. And oftentimes, especially in the cases where you can't prosecute, or even where a victim doesn't want to prosecute, just knowing that what happened to them has been validated and confirmed, and that we have issued these reports where we say, not only did this happen to you, but we've also seen through the course of our investigation that it's happened to several others. I think that it really changes a person and how they are able to move forward in their life. And I know I personally have talked to a woman who was in her 70s and who was abused as a young girl. And it really seemed to change her outlook as it pertained to feeling as though like someone cared enough to investigate her case, even though the priests had long since passed away. Someone cared enough to confirm that the things that had happened to her were true. And I don't know, I think it's like I said, having a trauma-informed, victim-centered approach has been immeasurably helpful, I think, to the lives of so many people who have been impacted by this. And I can't possibly overstate how psychologically damaging it is when a person suffers from sexual assault. And that's one of the things that has been bothering me so much lately, is how sexual assault, after we spent years trying to make sure that the criminal justice system treated this crime with the significance that it deserves because of the severity of the impact that it has on people, feels like we're backsliding a little bit. And I guess what I want to say, at least from the perspective of the Michigan Department of Attorney General, we are going to continue to take these crimes extremely seriously. And I hope that the sexual assault victims understand that and continue to contact our department. Danielle, do you want to add to that?
The only thing further that I would add is that, this report, as well as 25 years of working with sexual assault survivors, it is a common theme, I think, that victims step forward into the criminal justice system because they want to make sure that it doesn't happen to somebody else again. And I think for some survivors, particularly those that were not able to move forward on a criminal case, to have the ability to be involved in a report where their offender is going to be named is really important to them and really significant, to serve as a warning to those who still may have loyalties to those people, because every one of these offenders has, I don't want to say a following, but because they're a priest, they have an authority status that many people will choose to not believe these victims. And so for, I think, many victims, seeing it in writing and seeing it a report done by the Attorney General's office is a significant source of healing for them, because it does represent a public awareness for those victims that their offenders have been named and that people are aware of it, so that it doesn't happen again.
Thank you.
Ken Kolker, and then after Ken, we have Kelly.
Yeah, I've been texting back and forth with a survivor of Father Dennis Wagner, who says he was a victim of first-degree sexual assault in the early 1980s, and is wondering in his text why no criminal charges since this is first degree, saying he would be willing to go to court, be willing to testify, when he wonders why it's not moving forward.
AG, do you want me to take that one?
Yes, please.
Yep. So Father Wagner has, I think, one of the more lengthy reports, and it really is quite tragic. Unfortunately, as we talked about earlier, the statute of limitations in the 1980s was 6 years. And so if it happened in 1980, then we would have had to have brought charges by 1986, because as far as we knew, Father Wagner was not somebody who was sent out of state. And so that time just goes. The earliest or the latest, I guess, we would have been able to charge anybody would have been about 1995. And we were not aware of anybody who was willing to talk to us where that abuse had happened during that time frame, in order to be able to bring those charges. And so unfortunately for the survivor that you're texting with, that statute of limitations ran out long before we ever got involved in any of this. And again, just because the statute of limitations now for CSC1 has been eliminated, once the statute has run, there is no ability for us to then go back and pick it up. It's a constitutional violation that we simply can't overcome.
Thank you.
Yep.
Callie and then Beth.
Hi. So there's a theme throughout this report with victims, of dismissal of claims, of some just, not believing the victim. And there may be, even though some of these instances happened decades ago, there may be people wanting to come out and share their story after years of just being dismissed. What message do you have for those people who are still carrying this trauma with them, who want to share their story?
Danielle.
I think if there are survivors that want to talk about their experience, that we encourage them to reach out to the tip line. The tip line is in the report. I apologize, I don't have it memorized. Or they can call the department and we'll get you in contact with our victim advocate, and they can certainly share their story with us. For those that we've already released reports on, we're continuing to take information and we update those reports. Every time we release a new report, we update the old ones. If there is additional or new information, we do include that. And so I think for survivors who are still struggling, please reach out. We can help connect you with local resources in wherever you live. Even if you don't live here in Michigan anymore, if you live across the country, we can try to put you in contact with our local providers. And that, at least in the department, I think, we start by believing. And we want to listen and we want to hear and we want to be able to take that information. And if we can move forward with a criminal case, then that is something that we've shown that we're willing to do. And so for those who are listening, please reach out.
Thank you, Danielle. I just dropped the tip line in the chat as well for everybody. It's also listed in the press release. Beth LeBlanc.
Hey, I just wanted to double check something from the report. So if I'm reading this correctly, the 51 priests that you took reports on, none of those currently work in the diocese, is that correct? And then also, if from what you saw of these stories, were these priests removed promptly from the diocese, or did it differ based on whether it occurred before 2002 or after 2002? Just hoping to kind of understand that.
Yeah, so I think the term of art is inactive ministry. I think some of them are retired. I think some of them maybe have moved to other states. They may very well be ministering in other parts of the country, but they are not an active ministry in the Diocese of Grand Rapids. In terms of whether or not they were removed promptly, I do think it depends on the time of the year. Not by time of the year. I think it depends on the year. I think for those who post 2002, the behavior by the diocese in terms of removing folks was much more prompt. Anything prior to 2002, I think, is kind of hit or miss. And again, we've tried to do our best to document what that looks like in each one of these individual reports.
Thank you. Seeing no more hands up, last call for questions. Does anyone have a final question? Great. Well, thank you so much. If you think of anything you would like to follow up with, feel free to email us at agpress@michigan.gov. And thank you all so much for joining today. Have a great day.